the world is watching us open-mouthed at the moment as we're conducting this reckless experiment, a petri dish of 65 million people, a reckless experiment, the world watching and wondering how on earth it came to this. You know, our reputation will be blemished for years to come. We will be stigmatized for the way we've dealt with this. Freedom Day is now looking like a complete chaotic mess. I'm flabbergasted, I'm disappointed. I've not supported this government's approach to the pandemic, but I'm shocked that the fact is that they don't ever learn from what the experiences have been over the last 18 months. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is definitely the case of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I'll be staggered if we don't now have some very difficult months ahead. George Orwell in 1984 predicted a lot of what we've been experiencing recently. You use the word freedom to mean imprisonment. You know, we're imprisoned by this virus. It was suggested that the freedom would be the freedom to go on holiday to Mediterranean destinations. But actually, we're not going to have freedom while this virus is allowed to run riot. We had the same thing with Independence Day last year. Well, we're certainly not independent at the present time. So the language, the abuse of language in political argument and discourse is all part of this situation that we find ourselves in after 2 years of a corrupt and incompetent government. Freedom Day, well, it's beginning to look very jaundiced now, isn't it? You know, Boris Johnson was going to do his Churchill thing, a bit like Tony Blair used to appear in the desert of Iraq looking like the Messiah. You know, we have this posturing by politicians. We need grown-up politics in this country, not posturing. We should have known from Independence Day on the 4th of July last year, which all went pear-shaped. And it seems very much like a rerun of that, you know, when last year we had the opportunity of getting the virus down to very low levels, but instead we let it rip. And the same thing looks as though it's likely to happen now. They've got very high rates of the virus, mostly the Indian variant, very high rates in the 15 to 30 age group, especially high rates in the 20 to 24-year age group. This is the group that spend a lot of time in pubs and bars and restaurants and stuff. And, you know, this is where the virus is probably spreading. And as of tomorrow, that's going to be unlimited. The admissions to hospital are accelerating. The number of cases of the virus is doubling every week or so. The number of deaths, although still nowhere near what it was in the winter, is beginning to climb. We're getting to know more and more about long COVID. It seems to affect up to 50% of people who've had the virus in some way or another. And this week we learned that there is as many as 200 different symptoms of long COVID. I mean, you know, this is science fiction in practice, made much worse by the incompetence of the Johnson government. And to boot now, here we have this you couldn't make it up stuff about Javid getting the virus, despite having had 2 AstraZeneca jabs. And that just, you know, underlines the fact that the vaccine is not 100%. The AstraZeneca may be better than the Pfizer now, it turns out. Israel has been reporting on large numbers of people who've had 2 Pfizer getting the virus, and the protection after 2 jabs of Pfizer may only be about 70%. Now, the significance of this, of course, is that the longer and higher the level that the virus is circulating, the more chance there is of us getting a new variant. And, you know, this country already gave the world Kent, which ran through Europe. We've got India running wild now. What will happen next? Will it be Birmingham or Leeds Or Cornwall, with everybody going down to Cornwall for their holidays, crowding the beaches and the bars and so on, which will be the new variant. And so, this is a chemistry mixture of potent toxicity potentially. And throw into that the government attitude of, don't do what I do, but do as I say. The continuing breakdown of trust, the fact that the cabinet are saying, why should they socially isolate? They're not plebs, they're the elite. They'll do something else. They'll do daily testing. The daily testing, has been being piloted for some months among the civil service, border force, and some of the other major government agencies. They've not told the public about this as an alternative to the social isolation which people have been having to do. And now you get them saying, we're not going to socially isolate, we'll just test every day. Thank you very much, say people whose incomes have been compromised, who've had to cancel holidays and all of that. And when we talk about the holidays, well, there we are. This is the old story of fog in the channel, continent cut off. The British government decides that we can go to places on this now very complicated 5-point scale of amber, amber plus, and red and green, and God knows what. No interest in whether they want us there, or whether if you go there, you might actually finish up spending your holiday quarantining in a hotel at the other end. And then when you come back, because of the impact of the social isolation on the folk working at the airports here, as well as the complexity of the paperwork involved in coming back into the country, you could be hours at Heathrow or Gatwick or Birmingham or Manchester or Newcastle. You could be hours getting back into the country and going through customs and immigration. This is a complete shambles, and God knows what kind of democracy we live in, because they're not being held to account. There's the political side to this, and they aren't being held to account. There's the public health side to this, where we're heading ever upwards with the numbers of deaths and very large numbers of people with long COVID. And this is where the politics and the public health meet in the middle. And they're so important to see that we need good politics to get good public health. It's just come in that they've made a U-turn, that Boris Johnson and his political cabinet chums are now going to self-isolate. So this U-turn that they've made, clearly in response to the outrage, the British outrage among the ordinary people of this country, who can tell hypocrisy at 100 yards. And the government has had to make the biggest U-turn so far by, within hours, deciding that they're going to self-isolate anyway. I don't think you'll be able to put that genie back in the bottle. When Dominic Cumming went off to Barnard Castle last year and bluffed his way through, used up a large amount of the Prime Minister's political credibility, you would have thought that Johnson would have registered the importance of not doing that again. But this is really Barnard Castle Mark II. And it makes you wonder, this man who had one of the most expensive educations that's possible to have in this country at Eton, and yet doesn't seem capable of learning from experience. It says a lot about the role of Eton and some these similar top profile private schools, the way they are able to dominate public life, when what you have is gloss and veneer of people who basically are not competent. When you see Cummings now and the tweets and everything, it reminds you of lovers who've fallen out. hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Uh, Hell hath no fury like somebody who thinks they're the bee's knees and they're right at the heart of it, and then suddenly they're emasculated. It'd be very interesting to see when Hancock writes his book what he has to say about what went on last year. This is all going to fall apart at some point, but the problem is that the public are the victims, families are the victims, people are dying and becoming ill unnecessarily while the incompetence carries on. We'll learn a lot about this in years to come, but by then it'll be too late for so many grieving families. The government has got away with murder. We're now on twice as many civilians killed as civilians killed in the Second World War. Not all of those were avoidable, but a large proportion of them were. And, here we have the incompetence. We've now got, you talk about thieves falling out. We've now got the scientific advisors beginning to fall out, beginning to criticize each other, beginning to tell the stories about what happened in the early days. Here we have the chief medical officer being criticized by the head of the Wellcome Trust in a new book. And here we have the disagreement, the failures to take assertive, prompt action back in February and March last year that I describe very systematically in my book, Blinded by Corona, that really I think people might want to go and have a look at that again now, because the stories that are beginning to come out vindicate everything I said with you and in the articles and interviews I gave last year, when I was written off as some kind of, mad academic. And in fact, I've spent 40 years as a practicing public health doctor dealing with these kind of things. Many of these kind of things, whether they've been infections or disasters or even the mass shooting in Cumbria, when you have to get a grip, understand what's going on, and make sure you respond to the public's needs. This is terrible. And, one thing you have to think about is, what on earth must the rest of the world think of us? This country that had such a reputation for competence, for effective public health, that gave the world modern public health, and yet has failed so abysmally here. What must the world think? And, it's quite likely that we will now see another variant, and we'll give that as a present to the rest of the world if that happens. Remember, when we were following the science, we were told we were following the science. Every night we were told we were following the science. It seems a long way away now. We've had thousands of scientists writing letters, lobbying the government, telling them not to do this tomorrow, not to do this on the 19th of July. We've seen voices that were silent in those first months, voices that gave the government the benefit of the doubt for such a long time, for too long, in my opinion, are now clamoring for the government to think again. And the government no longer even paying lip service to following the science and the scientific advice. Question is, can we, despite the mess, despite the poor decisions, the errors of omission and commission, can we nevertheless emerge from this? I think, sadly, what this raises again is this whole question of whether throughout the whole thing the government's approach really has been about herd immunity, because what we are beginning to see now is that very large proportions of the 15 to 30-year-olds are getting the virus, and as a result of that they will develop some measure of immunity. Hopefully they'll develop a lot of immunity, but as well, a lot of them, we don't know what proportion, but probably a minimum of 10% will get some kind of long COVID, symptoms that might live with them for the rest of their lives, or certainly for months or years. So, maybe we can come out of this by a combination of the vaccination program and the herd immunity of the youngsters. But the joker in the pack remains that while the virus is circulating at a high level, we may turn up another mutant, another variant, which the vaccine may not work against, which may be more serious, which may kill more people as well. And, we aren't an island, because while we are a cesspit of infection of the virus, we are contributing that to the pool of infection around the world, to poor countries, to countries that don't have a vaccination program, that don't have a decent health service, where millions of people live in poverty and whose health is readily compromised by a virus like this. Our responsibility to the rest of the world was really to deal with this, and we haven't. We've been self-indulgent. We were more concerned to go to Ibiza and to Spain and to Italy and to Greece. We were more concerned to do that than to take our obligations seriously to the rest of the world and to the vulnerable people living here, and to pay respect to those families here, the 150,000 families who've lost loved ones in this pandemic. What we need is an inquiry now. We need an inquiry now, and it needs to be warts and all. The only way to really deal with this appalling hurt, all the grieving relatives, is to have an inquiry now. The government are avoiding it. They're kicking it into the long grass. They think that if they can put off the inquiry, they'll have all moved on. Lord Johnson will be in the Lords. He'll be cavorting around the world with his curious social life and making large amounts of money, flippantly writing for some rag of a newspaper. And it will all be left behind, the trail of mess, like the Thames Bridge before it and the other things for which he was well known, and which we really should have realised what we'd get if we got him as a Prime Minister. This is a very dark period in British politics and in British public health history. When this settles, as hopefully it will, hopefully before too long, but I'm not optimistic, then, we can't allow Boris Johnson and his government, who've colluded with this, to get away with this. We have to find the ways to hold them to account. An inquiry is essential. Sadly, corporate homicide, which is what I think is being going on here, democide it's called, killing of the people. It's not something which is even on our statute books. It's something which really we will struggle to pull off. But when you look at all those awful things that have happened over the years, the tragedies in the 80s, the Herald of Free Enterprise and King's Cross and Hillsborough and all of that, and Grenfell Tower most recently, of course, I don't hold out hope. And this is what's so demoralizing. When you live your life in this country, which you think is the beacon of democracy, and there's no accountability, we have to do something about this. We have to do something about this for the sake of our children and of our grandchildren and of the lives they can lead when we're well and truly gone. Because this country used to be the beacon of democracy. It's no longer that. This is not a good place to be in 2021. We need to be somewhere different. We need statesmen and stateswomen to step up to the plate here and sort this mess out, because Johnson is not going to do it, and his team around him are not going to do it themselves. They need to make sure that other people are drafted in to give them the expertise which they clearly don't have. And you see, as Johnson runs out of road, as his colleagues run out of road, we need accountability. My big fear in this now, and we've seen a taste of it in recent days and weeks. We saw the mob violence at Wembley in the Euro Cup final. We've seen other violent street demonstrations this year. My fear is that we're going to have a summer of violence on the streets because of the pent-up frustration and aggression that's been fueled by the incompetence and hypocrisy of the government. We must try to avoid that at all costs. But what it means is that the government, Boris Johnson, have to come clean, have to own up to all the mistakes they've made and commit themselves to working forward in a transparent way. You know, I'm just waiting for them to start manipulating the numbers again. As the numbers start to go up, 50,000 cases a day, 50 deaths a day. We saw what happened last year, the way the numbers were manipulated. We saw they didn't tell us about the care home deaths at first, and then we found out that doubled the number of deaths altogether. They then decided they were going to have a cut-off point and not tell us about deaths that occurred after 28 days from getting the virus, so taking thousands of deaths off the agenda. And we've seen another example of it in the last 24 hours or so, where now they're claiming that all adults have been offered the vaccine. There's a huge difference between being offered a vaccine and having a vaccine. And there are still millions of adults who haven't had 2 vaccines. The youngsters have only just started to have theirs. It'll be September before the 20s and 30s have had the opportunity to get their second vaccine. The number of new cases is doubling every 7 to 10 days now, that kind of thing. And it's faster, it's much faster than that. It's doubling every week among the 15 to 30-year-olds. That translates into serious illness 2 or 3 weeks later. We're beginning now to see the impact of all the football matches and the crowds in the pubs during the Euros, and we'll see the impact of Wembley and other large-scale events over the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I think we're looking at 100,000 new cases a day within the next week or two, probably, and the number of deaths is likely to top the 100 a day within the next few weeks as well, unless something dramatic happens. As a public health doctor who's been around these kind of emergencies for the last 40 years and dealt with many of them, and experienced this one with growing exasperation, all I can say to you as your advisor, as a public health advisor, is please don't give up on the measures that we need to take. Keep wearing the masks in crowded places and indoors. Don't go mixing with crowds. Keep the hygiene standards up and keep the social distancing, preferably 2 meters, not 1 meter. Keep it up. Be patient. We will get out of this, but we don't want to get out of it at the price of someone's granny or granddad. All these mistakes brought to life in my book, Blinded by Corona. You may need a stiff drink to keep your blood pressure down when you're reading it. And at the same time, keep supporting Patreon, independent news, where the only thing that matters is the truth.